The eastern range sat empty at 0300, exactly as Elena Vance preferred it. She settled into prone position on the cold concrete platform, pressing her cheek against the stock of the rifle that officially did not exist. Through her thermal scope, the target array glowed white against the black desert, 1,800 meters downrange where no supply coordinator had any business looking. She exhaled slowly, feeling her heartbeat in her fingertips. The first shot broke the silence, and the target dropped. She cycled the bolt without lifting her eye from the scope. Second shot. Third. Fourth. Each round found its mark within a 2-inch grouping that would have impressed the best shooters in special operations, shooters who would never know her name or her capabilities. Maybe you're watching this from somewhere quiet right now, somewhere you have been overlooked or dismissed, somewhere people have made assumptions about what you can and cannot do based on nothing more than what they see on the surface. If so, you will understand what comes next. Vance logged the session in the base records as equipment calibration, a designation that explained the ammunition expenditure without inviting questions. She broke down the rifle, stored it in the case that fit perfectly behind the false panel in her quarters, and walked to the shower block as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. By 0600, she would be Master Sergeant Elena Vance, logistics coordinator for supply chain management, the woman who counted protein bars and reconciled shipping manifests, the woman nobody noticed. The morning briefing convened at 0730 in the Joint Operations Command Center. Rear Admiral Marcus Holloway stood at the head of the table, reviewing the personnel roster on his tablet while his staff filtered in with coffee cups and classified folders. His eyes moved down the list of base personnel, pausing on names he did not recognize. He turned to his executive officer and gestured at the screen. "JSOC keeps sending me paper pushers when I need operators," he said. His voice carried the particular frustration of a man who had spent 30 years in the SEAL teams and now found himself commanding a base cluttered with people he considered non-essential. Look at this. Logistics coordinator. Supply chain management. What does that even contribute to mission readiness? The XO nodded in agreement, offering no defense for the administrative personnel who kept the base functioning. Holloway swiped past the entry without further comment, moving on to matters he considered worthy of his attention. Vance entered the supply warehouse at 0745, nodding to the two clerks who managed the actual logistics work. They knew her as professional, quiet, and unusually fit for someone who spent her days tracking inventory. She settled at her workstation and pulled up the shipping manifest that would occupy her morning, at least as far as anyone watching was concerned. The irony was not lost on her. She could eliminate every hostile threat within 2 kilometers of this warehouse. She had done exactly that in 4 different countries across 3 continents. Her longest confirmed kill sat at 2,847 meters, a shot that would be taught in sniper schools if anyone were allowed to know it happened. And here she sat, confirming that the protein bar shipment had arrived on schedule. Her secondary device vibrated once in her pocket. She waited until the clerks were occupied, then checked the encrypted message from her JSOC handler. Overwatch authorization active. Cover maintenance paramount. She memorized the confirmation and deleted the message, her expression never changing. The corridor outside the command center bustled with personnel moving between briefings. Vance walked toward the supply office with a clipboard in hand, the perfect image of administrative purpose. Admiral Holloway emerged from a doorway ahead, deep in conversation with his operations chief. He noticed her only because she stepped aside to let him pass. His eyes registered her rank insignia and the supply corps patch on her shoulder. "Sergeant," he said, the word carrying neither recognition nor interest. "Did the protein bar shipment arrive?" "Yes, sir," Vance replied. "Full inventory confirmed this morning." Holloway nodded once and walked on, already returning to his conversation about matters that actually concerned him. Vance watched him go, noting the dismissal in his posture, the complete absence of curiosity about who she was or why she was there. 3 years of deep cover had taught her to appreciate such invisibility. Being underestimated was not an obstacle. It was a mission. She returned to the warehouse and spent the afternoon reconciling manifests, answering questions from the clerks, and monitoring the encrypted radio frequencies that kept her connected to operations she was never supposed to acknowledge. The SEAL teams were preparing for a night mission. She heard the call signs and coordinates in fragments, building a picture of what would happen after sunset. If something went wrong out there, she would be ready. She was always ready. That was the part of her job that nobody on this base understood. And if she did her work correctly, nobody ever would. The briefing room filled with operators at 1,400 hours. SEAL team personnel occupied the front rows while support staff lined the walls. Everyone focused on the tactical displays showing satellite imagery of a compound deep in hostile territory. Operation Nightfall would launch at sunset, an extraction mission targeting a high-value asset who had requested emergency exfiltration. Admiral Holloway entered through the side door, and the room snapped to attention. He waved them down and moved to the podium, his presence commanding immediate focus. Before he spoke, his eyes swept the room and landed on Vance near the back corner, where she stood reviewing supply requisition forms with apparent disinterest in the classified briefing unfolding around her. All non-essential personnel clear the room, Holloway announced. His gesture toward the back was subtle but unmistakable. This briefing is operational only. Vance gathered her clipboard and exited without protest, her expression revealing nothing as she passed the Admiral. The door closed behind her, and Holloway turned to his operators, satisfied that the administrative clutter had been removed from his desk. Chief Warrant Officer Reyes worked late in the intelligence office, conducting a routine security audit that had become considerably less routine in the past hour. His monitor displayed base access logs from the previous 2 weeks, and a pattern had emerged that made no sense against the personnel files. Vance Elena, Master Sergeant, Supply Chain Management. Her badge had accessed the Eastern Range facility at 0300 on 3 separate occasions, then again at 0315 and 0340. The Eastern Range was isolated, used primarily for long-distance marksmanship training by special operations personnel. Supply coordinators had no business there, certainly not in the middle of the night. Reyes pulled up her personnel file and found exactly what he expected. Administrative background, support roles, 3 deployments to logistics positions. Nothing that explained why she needed access to a facility designed for shooters who operated at distances most soldiers could not comprehend. He flagged the anomaly in his report, but did not escalate it. Not yet. Anomalies required context, and he had learned that context often revealed itself to those who watch carefully. Vance returned to her quarters after the briefing dismissal and checked her secondary device. The encrypted message from her handler was brief. Nightfall proceeds, 2100. Overwatch position authorized grid reference follows. Cover maintenance paramount. Asset protection priority. She memorized the coordinates and deleted the transmission. The grid reference placed her authorized Overwatch position on a ridgeline 12 kilometers from the target compound, a location she had identified during her first reconnaissance of the area. From that elevation, she could cover the extraction route and provide support that no one would know existed unless everything went wrong. The mission briefing she had been excluded from was already mapped in her mind. She had monitored enough encrypted traffic to understand the operation, the insertion point, the extraction windows, the contingency protocols. Admiral Holloway did not want her in his briefing room, but the information flowed to her regardless through channels he would never acknowledge. Holloway sat in his office after the briefing, reviewing personnel assignments with his executive officer. The XO waited while the Admiral scrolled through the base roster, his expression souring as he reached the support staff listings. "I want the logistics sergeant transferred to Djibouti with the next supply flight," Holloway said. His tone left no room for discussion. "We are running a forward operating base for special operations. Every person here should contribute to mission capability. She is taking up space and resources that could support an actual operator." The XO nodded and made a note on his tablet. "I will process the request tonight, sir." The next supply rotation departs in 72 hours. Holloway leaned back in his chair, satisfied that one small inefficiency would soon be corrected. He had built his career on precision and purpose. Every element of his command should serve the mission. Anything that did not serve the mission was weight to be discarded. Vance crouched in the storage room adjacent to Holloway's office, retrieving communications equipment from a supply cabinet. The ventilation system carried sound between the rooms with remarkable clarity, a design flaw she had identified during her first week on base. She heard her name, heard the transfer order, heard the timeline. 72 hours. The supply flight would depart long after Operation Nightfall concluded. If the mission proceeded without complications, her transfer would simply relocate her cover identity to another base where she would continue the same invisible work. But if something went wrong tonight, if the SEAL team needed support that conventional assets could not provide, she would be the only option they did not know they had. She finished collecting the equipment and returned to her quarters, where the rifle case waited behind its hidden panel. The SEALs would launch in 6 hours. She would be in position in 5. And Admiral Holloway would never know that the woman he dismissed as administrative burden was the only thing standing between his operators and whatever waited for them in the darkness. The base shifted into pre-mission rhythm as sunset approached. Helicopters were prepped on the flight line. Operators conducted final equipment checks. The command center hummed with activity as staff monitored communications and tracked assets across the region. Vance watched from the warehouse loading dock, appearing to inventory crates while she calculated flight paths and terrain features in her mind. The ridgeline would require a 40-minute drive through unsecured territory. She would need to depart before the helicopters launched to reach her position in time. Her cover story was already prepared. Emergency supply run to a forward outpost. The paperwork would support the trip, and if anyone questioned her absence, she would be back before dawn with receipts and manifests to prove her administrative purpose. The first helicopter lifted off at 2047. Vance started her vehicle 3 minutes later. The first burst of gunfire shattered the silence without warning. Senior Chief Davis dropped behind a collapsed stone wall as rounds tore through the air where his head had been a half-second earlier. His teams scattered into cover positions, their training taking over before conscious thought could catch up. Contact front and flanking, Davis called into his radio. His voice was steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Multiple shooters, 3 positions minimum. We are pinned at grid reference Echo 7-9er. Petty Officer Hendricks took a round in the shoulder as he dove behind a burned-out vehicle. He grunted and clamped his hand over the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. The round had passed through cleanly, missing bone and artery, but the injury would slow him if they needed to move fast. Davis counted muzzle flashes in the darkness. The thermal scope on his rifle revealed heat signatures scattered across 3 elevated positions, shooters with overlapping fields of fire that turned the street into a kill zone. 15 hostiles at minimum, possibly more in reserve. The command center erupted into controlled chaos the moment Davis's contact report came through. Admiral Holloway moved to the tactical display, watching the blue icons representing his SEAL team surrounded by red threat markers that multiplied as the intelligence staff updated the picture. "Get that helicopter closer for extraction," Holloway ordered. His jaw tightened as he studied the terrain. "And get me QRF status now." The operations officer responded without looking up from his console. "Helicopter is taking fire, sir. Pilot reports he cannot approach without risking the aircraft. QRF is 32 minutes out at maximum speed." Holloway processed the mathematics of the situation. 32 minutes was an eternity in a firefight. His men were pinned with limited ammunition and at least 1 wounded. The helicopter could not reach them. Air support was unavailable due to civilian structures surrounding the engagement zone. He had no good options. Vance pressed the accelerator as the Humvee bounced along the unimproved road leading east from the base. The gate guard had logged her departure without questions, accepting her supply coordinator credentials and the explanation of an emergency equipment delivery. She was 12 minutes from the ridgeline, and the radio traffic in her earpiece painted a picture that was deteriorating by the second. The ambush was well planned. The hostiles had let the SEAL team pass the primary kill zone before springing the trap, cutting off their retreat route and channeling them into a crossfire. Whoever organized this attack understood American tactics and had prepared accordingly. She pushed the vehicle harder, ignoring the strain on the suspension as she navigated terrain that was never meant for high-speed travel. Davis fired a controlled burst at the nearest hostile position and watched two shooters duck behind cover. His team was returning fire effectively, but they were burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. At current consumption, they had perhaps 8 minutes before they would be down to pistols and knives. "Request immediate air support," Davis transmitted. His voice carried the first edge of urgency. "We cannot hold this position." The response came back within seconds. Negative on air support. Civilian structures in the engagement zone. Collateral damage risk exceeds authorization threshold. Davis bit back the response that rose in his throat. Authorization thresholds meant nothing when his men were bleeding in the dirt. He scanned the hostile positions again, looking for any tactical advantage he might have missed. The situation was simple. They were outgunned, outpositioned, and running out of time. Holloway watched the ammunition estimates tick downward on the tactical display. 7 minutes of sustainable fire. Then 5. His operations team worked the problem from every angle, but the answers kept coming back the same. QRF was too far. Air support was restricted. The helicopter could not approach. He ordered the pilot to attempt another approach vector, hoping the hostile fire had shifted focus. The helicopter banked toward the engagement zone and immediately drew tracer rounds from a fourth position they had not previously identified. The pilot pulled back to safe distance and reported the approach was not possible. Holloway slammed his palm against the console. The sound echoed through the command center, and every staff member flinched, but no one spoke. There was nothing to say. The ridgeline materialized out of the darkness exactly where Vance had calculated it would be. She killed the engine and grabbed her rifle case, moving to the optimal firing position she had identified during her first week of terrain reconnaissance. The ground was rocky and cold, but the elevation was perfect. She assembled the weapon with practiced efficiency, each component locking into place through muscle memory developed over 12 years. The thermal scope powered on, and she settled into prone position, pressing her eye to the optic. The engagement zone spread out before her at 2,100 meters. 8 heat signatures clustered behind cover, their positions defensive and deteriorating. 17 hostile signatures distributed across 4 firing positions, their muzzle flashes creating a constellation of threat points in the darkness. Vance calculated windage at 8 knots from the southeast. She adjusted for the elevation differential between her position and the target zone. The first hostile signature in her scope was operating a machine gun that was chewing through the SEAL team's cover. She exhaled slowly and placed her finger on the trigger. The SEALs had perhaps 5 minutes of ammunition remaining. She had 17 targets, and all the time she needed to eliminate them. The mathematics favored her, even if no one in that command center knew she existed. Chief Warrant Officer Reyes sat alone in the intelligence office, the security footage playing on his monitor for the 4th time. The timestamp read 2,244 hours, 14 minutes before the first contact report from the SEAL team. The image showed the motor pool in grainy night vision green, and walking through the frame was Master Sergeant Elena Vance, carrying a case that did not belong in the hands of a supply coordinator. He paused the footage and measured the case dimensions against known equipment profiles. The length matched a precision rifle system. The width accommodated a high-powered optic. The weight, judging by how she carried it, suggested a weapon designed for engagement distances that most shooters would consider impossible. Reyes pulled up her personnel file again and read through the entries he had already memorized. 10 years of service, 3 deployments to administrative positions, supply chain management certifications, performance reviews that described her as competent, professional, and unremarkable. Nothing in the official record suggested she had ever held a weapon more sophisticated than the standard sidearm required for base security. But the access logs told a different story. The range visits at 0300. The motor pool departure before the emergency was announced. The case that looked exactly like what a covert shooter would carry into the field. He reached for his phone and dialed Lieutenant Commander Chun in the operations center. Chun answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the tension that had gripped the entire base since the ambush began. "Reyes," she said, "I am in the middle of tracking this engagement. What do you need?" "I need access to JSOC compartmented personnel files," Reyes replied. "There is someone on this base whose credentials do not match their behavior, and I need to verify who they actually are." Chun was silent for a moment. "That level of access is above my clearance," she said. "Why are you asking about this now?" "Because I think the answer might explain what is happening out there tonight." Reyes kept his voice level despite the urgency building in his chest. "Can you try?" Chun hesitated, then agreed. "Give me 15 minutes. Admiral Holloway paced the command center floor, demanding answers that no one could provide. The hostile count on the tactical display had dropped from 17 to 10 in the span of 4 minutes, and not a single member of his staff could explain why. "Who is shooting?" he asked for the third time. His voice cut through the ambient noise of communications traffic and keyboard clicks. "I want to know what asset is operating in my area without my knowledge." The operations officer shook his head. "Sir, we have confirmed no friendly units in that sector. No drone coverage, no aircraft, no sniper teams. Whatever is eliminating those hostiles is not on our books." Someone suggested a local militia ally, a tribal group with historical ties to American operations in the region. Holloway dismissed the theory immediately. The shooting was too precise, too methodical. Militia fighters did not drop targets at 2,000 meters in total darkness. This was professional work from someone with military-grade training and equipment. "Find me answers," Holloway ordered. "I do not care how. Someone knows who is out there, and I want that information in front of me before this engagement ends." Chun accessed the compartmented database using her operations clearance, navigating through security protocols that required 3 separate authentication steps. She entered the search parameters Reyes had provided. Vanche Elena, Master Sergeant, current assignment logistics coordinator. The system processed the query for several seconds before returning a result that made her breath catch. The file existed, but it was flagged with a classification marker she had only seen twice in her career. Black Diamond, access restricted to JSOC compartmented operations and above. Her clearance was insufficient to open the file, but the flag itself was information. Black Diamond designation was reserved for a specific category of personnel, operators who did not officially exist, whose missions were never acknowledged, whose capabilities were hidden behind cover identities designed to make them invisible. She picked up the phone and called Reyes back. The intelligence officer answered immediately. "What did you find?" "Her file is Black Diamond," Chun said. The words carried weight that required no explanation between two people who understood what they meant. "I cannot access the contents, but the classification tells us everything we need to know." Reyes exhaled slowly. "Black Diamond is what I think it is?" he asked, though the question was really a confirmation. Chun nodded, even though he could not see her. "Couvert combat opérateur. Deep cover assignment. Deniable operations capability." She paused, letting the implications settle. The supply coordinator everyone has been ignoring is probably one of the most dangerous people on this base. Reyes looked at the frozen image on his monitor, the woman with the rifle case walking calmly toward a vehicle that would take her to a position where she could do exactly what was happening right now. The Admiral had tried to transfer her to Djibouti. He had dismissed her as administrative deadweight, and she had responded by driving into the darkness to save his men. "Does Holloway know?" Reyes asked. "Not yet," Chun replied, "but he's going to find out." The command center continued its frantic search for answers while the hostile count dropped to 8, then 6, then 4. Holloway watched the numbers fall with a mixture of relief and frustration. His men were surviving. Someone was saving them. and he had no idea who deserved the credit or the explanation. The truth was already forming in the minds of two people who had looked past the surface and found something remarkable hidden underneath. The supply coordinator was a ghost, and tonight she had decided to let her presence be known. Vance swept her thermal scope across the engagement zone, counting the signatures that remained. 10 hostiles had survived the initial elimination, and they were no longer fighting. They were running, scrambling toward a vehicle staging area 200 meters north of their original positions. If they reached those vehicles, they would escape into the network of roads that spiderwebbed through the region. They would regroup, rearm, and return to kill Americans another night. She could not allow that. The first runner was 70 meters from the nearest vehicle when her round caught him center mass. He dropped without a sound that would reach her ears at this distance. The second hostile turned at the movement, searching for a threat he could not see, and her next shot ended his search permanently. The third began sprinting, abandoning any pretense of tactical movement in favor of pure, desperate speed. Speed did not matter at 2,100 meters. Her rifle spoke, and he fell. The suppressor reduced her muzzle signature to a whisper, invisible against the dark ridgeline. The hostiles had no idea where death was coming from. They only knew it was coming, inevitable and precise, finding them no matter where they ran or how fast they moved. Senior Chief Davis watched through his rifle scope as the remaining hostiles died one by one. The shots came at intervals of 4 to 5 seconds, each one finding its target with mechanical precision. He had served alongside the best snipers in special operations for 15 years. He had witnessed impossible shots in training and combat across 4 continents. Nothing in his experience compared to what he was seeing now. The shooter was somewhere beyond his visual range, engaging targets at a distance that should have made accurate fire impossible in daylight, let alone in the darkness of a moonless night. Yet every round landed exactly where it needed to land. Center mass. Headshots on moving targets. Kill after kill after kill. Whoever was out there operated on a level that redefined what Davis thought he understood about the limits of human capability. The 8th hostile fell, then the 9th. The 10th made it within 20 meters of a vehicle before a round punched through his back and dropped him across the hood. The engagement zone fell silent. The only sounds the distant echo of the final shot and the crackling of small fires started by tracer rounds during the initial ambush. Davis keyed his radio. All hostiles down, he reported. His voice carried a quality he did not fully understand, something between relief and awe. 17 confirmed. 0 friendly casualties. Requesting permission to secure the area. The command center received the report in stunned silence. Admiral Holloway stared at the tactical display where 17 red threat markers had been replaced by 17 gray elimination indicators. For minutes. Single shooter. Every target neutralized from a position so distant that his own tracking systems had not detected the muzzle flashes. Secure the area and hold for QRF, Holloway ordered. His voice was steady, but his mind raced with questions he could not answer. I want a full assessment of hostile casualties when the area is safe. He turned to his operations officer. Find out who did this, he said. Someone saved my men tonight, and I want to know their name before sunrise. Vance broke down her rifle with the same practiced efficiency she had used to assemble it. Each component returned to its designated place in the case, the weapon disappearing as completely as if it had never existed. She scanned the ridgeline one final time to confirm she had left no evidence of her position, then carried the case back to her vehicle. The drive to the extraction point would take 18 minutes. QRF was still 20 minutes out. She would arrive first, establish her cover story, and blend back into the administrative background where she belonged. The medical supplies in the back of her Humvee would explain her presence. The chaos of the post-engagement response would mask any questions about her timeline. She had saved 8 lives tonight. The men she saved would never know her name. The Admiral who dismissed her would never understand how close he came to losing an entire team. That was the nature of her work, invisible until it mattered, forgotten the moment the crisis passed. Davis moved his team through the engagement zone, checking hostile bodies while maintaining security against any threats they might have missed. The scene told a story that matched what he had witnessed through his scope. Every casualty showed the same signature: single rounds placed with surgical precision, entry wounds clustered in kill zones that demonstrated either extraordinary luck or extraordinary skill. He knelt beside one of the fallen hostiles and studied the wound trajectory. The angle suggested a firing position somewhere to the east, elevated at a distance his mind struggled to calculate. He looked toward the ridgeline, barely visible against the dark horizon, a black mass of rock and shadow where someone had set up with a rifle and changed everything. The shooter was gone. Davis knew that with certainty. Whoever possessed that level of skill would not linger at a position that might eventually be identified. They would disappear back into whatever shadow had concealed them, leaving nothing behind but 17 bodies and a team of SEALs who would spend the rest of their lives wondering who had reached out across the darkness to save them. Hendricks approached with his shoulder wound bandaged, his face pale, but his movements steady. "Senior Chief," he said, "what the hell just happened?" Davis stood and looked once more toward the distant ridgeline. "I do not know," he admitted, "but whoever is out there just gave us our lives back." The QRF convoy arrived at the extraction point to find a battlefield already secured. The team leader stepped out of the lead vehicle and surveyed the scene with visible confusion, counting the hostile bodies scattered across the engagement zone while Davis approached to deliver his report. "We were pinned from 3 directions," Davis explained. "1 wounded, ammunition critical. Then someone started shooting from distance and dropped all 17 hostiles in under 4 minutes. We never saw them, never identified their position. By the time the firing stopped, whoever it was had already vanished." The QRF leader looked toward the eastern ridgeline, a dark silhouette against the marginally lighter sky. "Any idea who we should be thanking for this?" Davis shook his head. "Not a clue. But whoever they are, they shoot better than anyone I have ever seen." The extraction helicopter touched down at the designated landing zone, its rotors kicking up dust that forced everyone to shield their eyes. Davis guided his team toward the aircraft, supporting Hendricks, whose shoulder wound had stiffened during the wait. As they approached, he noticed a Humvee parked at the edge of the zone, its markings identifying it as a supply vehicle from the main base. A woman in logistics uniform knelt beside the helicopter, arranging medical equipment on a stretcher. She looked up as Davis approached and gestured for Hendricks to sit. "I heard the radio traffic," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Brought trauma supplies in case your medic needed backup." Davis studied her face as she worked on Hendricks, cutting away the field dressing to examine the wound beneath. Her hands moved with steady precision, no tremor, no hesitation. The chaos of the past hour had left his own hands shaking, but this supply sergeant worked as though treating gunshot wounds was something she did every Tuesday. "Sergeant Vance," she said without looking up, "supply chain management. Your medic did good work on this, but I have better bandages." Davis thanked her and helped load Hendricks into the helicopter. As the aircraft lifted off, he watched the supply Humvee grow smaller through the window. Something about her presence nagged at his thoughts, a detail that did not quite fit the picture she presented. Admiral Holloway waited on the helipad when the extraction bird touched down at base. His posture radiated the tension that had gripped him since the first contact report, a coiled energy that demanded answers his staff had failed to provide. He intercepted Davis before the senior chief could reach the medical station. "Debrief now," Holloway ordered. "I need to know everything about what happened out there." Davis began recounting the ambush, the hostile positions, the ammunition situation that had pushed them to the edge of catastrophe. Holloway cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I know what happened to your team," the Admiral said. "What I need to know is who was shooting, who eliminated 17 hostiles from a position we cannot even identify, who saved your men when every asset I had was unable to reach you." "Sir, I do not have that answer." Davis met the Admiral's eyes without flinching. "Whoever they were, they engaged from beyond our visual range. The shots came from the eastern ridgeline, over 2,000 meters. In total darkness, I have never seen shooting like that in my career. Holloway absorbed the information with visible frustration. Someone operated in his area without his knowledge, saved his team without his authorization, and disappeared without leaving a trace he could follow. The lack of control gnawed at him. Find out who it was he ordered. I want answers by morning. Vance returned the Humvee to the motor pool at 0347 hours, logging the medical supply usage in the inventory system with the same meticulous attention she applied to every aspect of her cover identity. The supplies she had actually used were minimal. The supplies she claimed to have delivered would match the paperwork perfectly. She walked toward her quarters through corridors that were mostly empty at this hour, her rifle case already secured behind its hidden panel. The mission was complete. Her cover remained intact. In 12 hours, she would be reconciling shipping manifests as though nothing had happened. Chief Warrant Officer Reyes stepped out of a doorway ahead of her, his appearance too deliberate to be coincidental. "Sergeant Vance," he said. "Late night for supply chain management." "Emergency response," she replied. "I heard the radio traffic and grabbed medical equipment. The team had a wounded operator." Reyes nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "That is interesting," he said, "because your badge accessed the motor pool at 2,247 hours. The first contact report came in at 22:58. He let the timeline hang between them. You left before you could have known there was an emergency." Vance met his gaze without hesitation. "I was doing inventory when I noticed we were low on trauma supplies. I decided to restock the forward cache. When the contact report came through, I was already on the road." She paused. Lucky timing. Reyes studied her for a long moment, searching for the crack in her composure that would confirm what he already suspected. He found nothing. Her expression was calm, her story was plausible, and her eyes revealed absolutely nothing. "Very lucky," he agreed. "Get some rest, Sergeant. It has been a long night for everyone." Davis sat in the debriefing room after Holloway dismissed him, unable to stop his mind from replaying the engagement. The shots had come from the ridgeline. 2,000 meters minimum, possibly more. Darkness so complete that thermal optics were the only viable option. 17 kills in 4 minutes. He thought about the shooters he knew, the best in the special operations community. None of them could have done what he witnessed tonight. The precision required was beyond exceptional. It was impossible by any standard he understood. Then he thought about the woman at the landing zone, the supply sergeant with steady hands and calm eyes, the one who appeared out of nowhere with exactly the right equipment at exactly the right time, the one whose composure never wavered despite the violence that had just unfolded. The thought was ridiculous. A logistics coordinator did not possess the skills to make those shots. The idea was absurd on its face. But Davis could not shake the feeling that something about Sergeant Vance did not add up. And in his experience, things that did not add up usually meant someone was hiding something significant. Reyes spread the evidence across the table in the secure conference room, arranging the pieces so Chun could follow the narrative he had assembled over the past 3 hours. Access logs showing range visits at 0300. Security footage of the rifle case. Timeline analysis proving Vance departed before the emergency was announced. And at the center of it all, the Black Diamond classification flag that transformed a supply coordinator into something far more dangerous. Chun studied the documents and added her own research to the picture. "I pulled her previous duty stations," she said. 3 of them correspond exactly to classified operations where unidentified sniper support was documented but never attributed. Operation Sandstorm in 2019, the Mogadishu extraction in 2021, the compound assault in Yemen last year. Every location, every timeline matches her assignments. Reyes nodded. The pattern was undeniable once he knew what to look for. Vance appeared in administrative roles at forward operating bases, and shortly after her arrival, impossible shots started saving American lives. She was not a supply coordinator who happened to be present during extraordinary events. She was the extraordinary event, hidden behind paperwork and protein bar inventories. "We need to take this to Morrison," Reyes said. "This is beyond our authority to handle." Captain Morrison commanded the base intelligence section from an office cluttered with classified materials and secure communications equipment. He listened to their briefing without interruption, his expression growing more serious as the evidence accumulated. When they finished, he picked up his secure phone and dialed a number from memory. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Morrison spoke little, mostly listening, his face draining of color as the person on the other end confirmed what Reyes and Shun had pieced together. He thanked the caller and replaced the handset with deliberate care. "She's exactly who you think she is," Morrison said. "Master Sergeant Elena Vance has been operating under Black Diamond protocols for 3 years. 67 confirmed kills across 4 theaters. Longest confirmed shot at 2,847 meters. Tonight, she broke cover to provide unauthorized fire support when conventional assets could not reach the SEAL team." Chun absorbed the numbers with visible shock. 67 kills placed Vance among the most lethal snipers in American military history. The 2,847-meter shot exceeded any documented engagement she had ever studied, and all of it hidden behind the facade of a woman who counted shipping manifests. "Admiral Holloway needs to be briefed," Morrison continued. "JSOC is already managing the exposure, but the base commander has to understand what happened in his area of operations." Chun hesitated before asking the question. How is he going to react? He tried to transfer her to Djibouti yesterday. He dismissed her in front of his entire staff. Morrison stood and gathered the classified folder containing Vance's operational profile. "That is exactly why he needs to see this," he said. "Some lessons are only learned through embarrassment." Holloway sat alone in his office, reviewing the engagement footage for the 3rd time. The tactical display showed the progression of hostile eliminations, 17 markers transitioning from red to gray in a sequence that defied everything he understood about combat operations. For minutes, single shooter, distance exceeding 2,000 meters in total darkness. He had commanded SEAL operations for 6 years. He had worked alongside the finest shooters in special operations. Nothing in his experience provided a framework for what he was seeing. The knock on his door interrupted his analysis. Morrison entered carrying a folder marked with classification stamps that indicated contents beyond even the Admiral's normal access level. Holloway gestured for him to sit. "We identified your shooter," Morrison said. He did not elaborate, simply sliding the folder across the desk and waiting. Holloway opened the folder and found himself looking at a photograph he recognized immediately. The supply coordinator, the woman he had dismissed in the corridor, the sergeant he had ordered transferred to Djibouti because she contributed nothing to mission readiness. The operational profile beneath the photograph told a different story. Black Diamond asset, 12 years in covert operations, 67 confirmed kills. For theaters of operation, longest engagement 2,847 meters. Full authorization for unilateral defensive action in support of friendly forces. He turned the pages slowly, reading the details of a career that had unfolded in parallel to his own without ever intersecting. While he commanded from operation centers, she had been lying in the dirt at impossible distances, eliminating threats that conventional forces could not reach. While he reviewed personnel rosters and dismissed her as administrative burden, she had been monitoring his operations and preparing to intervene if his men needed saving. 3 years, Holloway said finally. "She's been on my base for 3 years." Morrison nodded. Deep cover assignment. Her logistics role provided access to operational planning and communications without raising suspicion. She was positioned to provide support that nobody knew existed until tonight. Holloway closed the folder and sat in silence, processing the magnitude of his misjudgment. He had tried to remove her from his base. He had complained about paper pushers and deadweight. He had walked past her in the corridor and asked about protein bars while she carried the skills to eliminate every threat within 2 kilometers. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Her quarters," Morrison replied, awaiting instructions from JSOC regarding her cover exposure. Holloway stood and walked toward the door. Morrison asked what he intended to do. The Admiral paused with his hand on the doorframe. I'm going to talk to her, Holloway said. I owe her that much. I owe her considerably more than that. But a conversation is where I will start. The knock came at 0523 hours. Vance had been sitting on her bunk for 20 minutes, monitoring the communications traffic that told her everything she needed to know about what was happening across the base. Morrison's call to JSOC. The secure conference in the intelligence section. The classified folder being walked to the Admiral's office. She opened the door and found Holloway, standing in the corridor, his expression carrying a weight she had never seen in their brief previous encounters. The dismissiveness was gone. The casual disregard had been replaced by something more complex, a mixture of recognition and discomfort that told her the conversation she had avoided for 3 years was finally arriving. She stepped aside without speaking, and he entered the small room that had served as her cover residence since her assignment began. Holloway stood in the center of the space, taking in details he had never bothered to notice before. The room was sparse, functional, containing nothing that revealed the person who occupied it. No photographs, no personal items, no evidence of a life beyond the walls of this base. It was the room of someone who understood that attachment created vulnerability. How long have you been operational? He asked. His voice carried none of the authority he typically projected. This was not a commanding officer interrogating a subordinate. This was a man seeking to understand something that had challenged his assumptions. 3 years in this assignment, Vance replied. 12 years total in the program. She remained standing near the door, her posture relaxed but alert. The habits of her profession did not disappear simply because a conversation had turned personal. Holloway nodded slowly. 12 years. While he had been climbing the ranks through conventional channels, she had been operating in shadows he did not know existed. While he had been commanding operations from secure facilities, she had been lying in the dirt at distances that made his tactical planning irrelevant. Tell me about tonight, he said. Vance described the engagement with clinical precision. 17 targets distributed across 4 positions. Engagement distance of 2,100 meters. Wind correction for 8 knots from the southeast. Thermal optics compensating for 0 ambient light. For minutes of shooting, 17 eliminations. She recited the details as though reading from an after-action report, stripping the violence of any emotional weight. Holloway listened without interruption. The technical proficiency she described exceeded anything in his experience. SEAL snipers were among the best in the world, and what she had accomplished tonight would have been exceptional for any of them. For a woman operating alone, without support, from a position no one knew existed, it was remarkable. Why did you break cover? He asked. The question had been forming since he first opened her file. You could have stayed hidden. Let QRF handle the situation. Maintained your operational security. Vance met his eyes directly. QRF was 32 minutes out, she said. Your team had approximately 7 minutes of sustainable ammunition remaining. The mathematics were simple, Admiral. 8 men were going to die unless someone intervened. I was the only intervention available. The mathematics were simple. She reduced the lives of 8 special operators to an equation, a calculation of time and distance and probability. And she had solved that equation by stepping out of the shadows she had inhabited for 3 years. Holloway was silent for a long moment. The weight of his misjudgment pressed against his chest, demanding acknowledgement. I tried to have you transferred, he said finally. I called you deadweight. I dismissed your presence as administrative burden that contributed nothing to my operations. Vance nodded. I know, she said. I heard you give the order. The ventilation systems in this facility carry sound quite effectively between adjacent rooms. The revelation added another layer to his discomfort. She had heard him dismiss her, and she had responded by saving his men anyway. She had known exactly what he thought of her, and it had not changed her actions when the moment required her skills. Did you resent it? Holloway asked. Being dismissed, being underestimated, being treated as though you did not matter. Vance considered the question before answering. Resentment is a luxury I cannot afford, she said. My job is to protect people who do not know they are being protected. Being underestimated is not an obstacle in that work. It is a requirement. If you had recognized what I was, my cover would have been compromised long before tonight. She paused, and something in her expression softened slightly. Tonight, the protection became visible. That is the only difference between yesterday and today. The work is the same. The purpose is the same. Only the awareness has changed. Holloway absorbed her words, recognizing the philosophy of someone who had dedicated their life to service without recognition. She had accepted invisibility as the price of effectiveness. She had embraced dismissal as a tool of her profession. And when the moment demanded action, she had acted without hesitation or resentment. He extended his hand. "The SEAL community owes you 8 lives," he said. "I owe you considerably more than that. An apology seems inadequate, but I offer it nonetheless." Vance shook his hand, her grip firm and brief. "You owe me nothing, Admiral. I was doing my job, same as your men were doing theirs. The only difference is that my job required you to believe I was someone else." Holloway released her hand and moved toward the door. He paused at the threshold, turning back to face her one final time. "What happens now?" he asked. "With your cover blown, what comes next for you?" Vance sat down on her bunk, the first sign of weariness she had allowed herself to show. "JSOC will reassign me," she said. "Probably to an acknowledged unit where my capabilities can be utilized without the complications of cover maintenance. The shadow work will continue, but someone else will carry it." Holloway nodded and left without further words. The corridor stretched empty before him as he walked back toward the command center, his understanding of his own base fundamentally altered by a conversation that had lasted less than 10 minutes. Behind him, Vance remained seated on her bunk, processing the end of an identity she had worn for 3 years. Tomorrow she would begin the transition to whatever came next. Tonight she would allow herself a moment to acknowledge what she had lost and what she had preserved. 8 lives saved, 1 cover destroyed. The mathematics, as always, were simple. Senior Chief Davis requested a meeting with Admiral Holloway at 0900 hours, submitting the formal request through channels that guaranteed a response within the hour. He had spent the night replaying the engagement in his mind, cataloging the details that refused to form a coherent picture. The shots from the ridgeline, the woman at the landing zone, the supply sergeant whose hands never trembled while she treated Hendricks. Holloway's aide escorted him into the Admiral's office and closed the door behind him. The Admiral gestured to the chair across from his desk, his expression carrying none of the urgent frustration that had defined him during the crisis. Something had changed in the hours since Davis last saw him on the helipad. "You wanted to thank whoever saved your team," Holloway said. It was not a question. He had anticipated the purpose of this meeting before Davis submitted the request. Davis nodded. "My men are alive because someone reached out across 2,000 meters of darkness and eliminated every threat we faced. I need to know who that was. I need to express what that means to us." Holloway leaned back in his chair and studied the senior chief for a long moment. "What I am about to tell you is classified beyond anything in your current access level," he said. "But you have earned the right to know, and JSOC has authorized the disclosure." He described the situation in measured terms. The logistics coordinator Davis had seen treating Hendricks was not a supply sergeant. She was a Black Diamond asset, a covert precision shooter who had been embedded at the base for 3 years under deep cover. Last night, she broke that cover to provide fire support when conventional assets could not reach the team. 17 kills, 2,100 meters. For minutes, Davis absorbed the information in silence, his mind restructuring everything he thought he understood about the woman at the landing zone. The steady hands made sense now. The calm demeanor, the way she appeared exactly where she needed to be with exactly the right equipment. She had not stumbled onto the extraction point by coincidence. She had driven there after saving their lives from a distance he could barely comprehend. The shot placement, Davis said finally. "I examined the hostile casualties. Every round was center mass or headshot. I have never seen precision like that outside of competition shooting, and those are controlled conditions with known distances and zero pressure." Holloway nodded. Her longest confirmed engagement is 2,847 meters. 67 confirmed kills across 4 theaters. She is one of the most lethal shooters in American military history, and, until last night, nobody on this base knew she existed. Davis asked if he could speak with her to deliver his thanks directly. Holloway shook his head. JSOC is managing her transition, he explained. Her cover is blown, and she will be reassigned to an acknowledged unit. But before you arrived, I spoke with her myself. The first thing she asked about was the condition of your wounded operator. She wanted to know if Hendricks would recover fully. The detail struck Davis with unexpected force. She had killed 17 men from 2 kilometers away, then driven to the extraction point to provide medical care, and her first concern upon speaking with the Admiral was whether the wounded SEAL would be okay. The contrast between her lethal capability and her evident humanity created a picture of someone who understood exactly what her skills meant and why they mattered. Lieutenant Commander Chen spent the morning on secure communications with JSOC headquarters, coordinating the administrative response to a situation that had exposed significant gaps in operational protocols. The exposure of a Black Diamond asset had triggered reviews across multiple commands, each seeking to understand how a covert operator could function on a base with a commanding officer actively worked to remove her. The answer was uncomfortable but necessary. Holloway had not been briefed on Vance's presence because deep cover protocols required complete separation from conventional command structures. But those same protocols had created conditions where a senior officer dismissed a critical asset as administrative burden. The system had worked exactly as designed, and the design had nearly failed. Chun drafted recommendations for revised integration procedures. Commanding officers at forward operating bases would receive classified notifications of embedded assets, not operational details, but enough awareness to prevent the kind of dismissiveness that had characterized Holloway's treatment of Vance. The notifications would be minimal, acknowledging only that certain personnel operated under special authorities and should not be subject to routine transfer or reassignment. Holloway reviewed her recommendations and added his endorsement. His after-action report included an unusual addendum, a personal statement acknowledging his assumptions about Vance and accepting responsibility for the conditions that forced her to break cover. He did not excuse his behavior or minimize his misjudgment. He simply documented what had happened and what he had learned from it. His superior at JSOC called within 2 hours of receiving the report. The conversation was brief but significant. Holloway's statement would be used as a training case study for senior officers assuming command of joint operations bases. His willingness to acknowledge error publicly would serve as an example for others who might face similar situations. Vance received her transition orders at 1,400 hours. Her handler delivered them personally, appearing at her quarters with a folder containing her new assignment and the administrative paperwork required to close out her cover identity. The Black Diamond program considered the mission a success despite the exposure. 8 lives saved outweighed the operational security costs of revealing a single asset. She would be reassigned to an acknowledged special operations unit where her capabilities could be utilized without the complications of cover maintenance. Training cadre, the handler explained, passing her skills to the next generation of precision shooters. The shadow work would continue, but others would carry it while she shaped those who would follow. Vance accepted the orders without comment. 3 years of invisibility had ended in 4 minutes of shooting, and she felt neither regret nor relief at the transition. The work had required what it required. She had provided what was needed. Now, the work would take a different form, and she would adapt as she always had. The handler paused at the door before leaving. For what it is worth, he said, the Admiral submitted a commendation request this morning. It will be classified, of course, but it will exist in your file alongside everything else you have accomplished. Vance nodded once. The recognition meant less to her than the knowledge that 8 men would return to their families because she had been in position when the mathematics demanded action. That was the only commendation that mattered. 1 week after the engagement that changed everything, Elena Vance walked across the flight line, toward a transport aircraft that would carry her to her next assignment. She wore civilian clothes for the first time in 3 years, her military identity temporarily suspended during the transition between covers. The uniform of the supply coordinator had been returned to storage. The woman who wore it had ceased to exist. Senior Chief Davis stood near the aircraft stairs, waiting with the deliberate patience of someone who had something important to say. He had requested permission to see her off, a courtesy that JSOC granted after confirming his security clearances were sufficient for the encounter. Vance approached and stopped a few feet away, recognizing the purpose in his posture. Davis extended his hand, and she took it, feeling the firm grip of a man who understood what she had done and why it mattered. "My team wanted me to deliver a message," Davis said. "8 men are going home to their families because of what you did. Hendricks is already asking when he can return to duty. Martinez called his daughter for the first time in 6 months. Thompson proposed to his girlfriend yesterday." He paused, letting the weight of those details settle between them. "You gave us that. All of it. And we will carry that debt for the rest of our lives." Vance shook her head slightly. "There is no debt," she said. "You would have found a way. Operators like your team always find a way." Davis disagreed, but respected the deflection. He had seen enough combat to recognize someone who did not seek credit for their actions. The best warriors he knew were often the quietest about their accomplishments. "Will you miss it?" he asked. "The cover work. Being invisible." Vance considered the question with the same measured thoughtfulness she applied to everything. Parts of it, she admitted. The simplicity of being underestimated. The freedom of operating without expectations. "But I have spent 12 years in the shadows. Perhaps it is time to let others carry that weight while I teach them how to bear it." Davis nodded. "The sniper community will be better for having her as an instructor." The skills she possessed were rare enough that preserving them through teaching represented a service as valuable as the operations themselves. He stepped back and rendered a salute that she was not technically entitled to receive in civilian clothes. She returned it anyway, a gesture between warriors that transcended the formalities of rank and uniform. Then she climbed the stairs and disappeared into the aircraft without looking back. Admiral Holloway watched the departure from the windows of the command center, tracking the aircraft as it taxied toward the runway. His executive officer stood beside him, reviewing the personnel changes that had accumulated over the past week. The XO noted that the transfer request for Sergeant Vance had been formally withdrawn, a bureaucratic formality given that she no longer existed in the system under that name. Holloway acknowledged the update without comment, his attention fixed on the aircraft, now accelerating toward takeoff. "The next time someone seems out of place on my base," Holloway said quietly, "I will ask questions before making assumptions. I will consider the possibility that what I see on the surface does not represent everything that exists underneath." The XO recognized the statement as a lesson learned rather than a conversation requiring response. He had served under Holloway long enough to understand when the Admiral was speaking to himself as much as anyone else. The aircraft lifted off and banked toward the east, carrying a woman whose capabilities had reshaped Holloway's understanding of his own command. He would not forget the lesson. The cost of learning it had been his pride, and he considered that price reasonable given what he had gained in return. The SEAL team gathered in the briefing room 3 days later, preparing for their next deployment. Davis stood before them with a mission folder that would occupy their attention for the coming weeks. But before he opened it, he set the folder aside and addressed something more important. "I want to tell you about the night we should have died," he said. The room fell silent, every operator present understanding the weight of those words. "We were pinned by 17 hostiles with no extraction available and ammunition running critical. Every one of us should have come home in a box." He described what happened next. The shots from the ridgeline, the impossible precision, the systematic elimination of every threat they faced. And then he told them who was responsible, the supply coordinator they had ignored for months, the woman in logistics who counted protein bars and reconciled shipping manifests while carrying skills that exceeded anything in their experience. "When we get back to the States," Davis concluded, "we're going to find her. and we're going to buy her drinks for the rest of our careers. Because she gave us something that cannot be repaid, and the least we can do is try." The team absorbed the story in silence, recalibrating their understanding of what had happened and who had saved them. The woman they had walked past without noticing had reached across 2 kilometers of darkness to preserve their lives. The debt Davis described was real, and every man in the room accepted his share of it. Vance arrived at her new duty station on a Tuesday morning, stepping off the transport in a sunshine that felt foreign after months in the desert. The base housed the advanced training program for precision shooters, a facility where the next generation learned skills that most soldiers would never possess. She walked toward the main building and past a group of young operators who recognized her face from briefings they were not supposed to discuss. One of them stepped forward, his expression carrying the particular reverence reserved for those who had achieved legendary status within the community. "Sergeant Vance," he said, "are you really the one who made the night shots in Africa? The engagement everyone is talking about?" Vance paused and met his eyes. "I am," she confirmed. The young operator swallowed visibly. "How did you do it?" 2,100 meters in total darkness against 17 targets. "How is that even possible?" Vance allowed herself a slight smile, the first genuine expression of warmth she had shown in longer than she could remember. "Practice," she said, and then she walked into the training facility where she would spend the coming years shaping those who would follow her into the shadows. Maybe you have witnessed something like this yourself. Someone revealing capabilities that nobody expected. Someone stepping forward when a moment demanded more than anyone thought they could give. If you have a story like that, share it in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what comes next. Because sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when being invisible is no longer enough. Senior Chief Petty Officer Davis led his 8-man team across the tarmac toward the MH-60 helicopter waiting with rotors turning. The night air carried the smell of aviation fuel and the particular tension that preceded every operation, a familiar weight that settled into the muscles and sharpened the senses. His men moved with the practiced efficiency of operators who had conducted dozens of insertions together, each knowing his role without instruction. Admiral Holloway stood at the edge of the helipad, offering final words as the team approached. "Clean extraction," he said, his voice cutting through the rotor wash. "Minimal footprint. I want you back before sunrise with the asset secured." Davis acknowledged with a nod and a response that carried absolute confidence. "We will have him on this bird in 4 hours, Admiral. You can count on it." Holloway watched them board and lifted his hand in a gesture that was part salute, part benediction. The helicopter rose into the darkness and banked toward the east, carrying 8 of his best operators to a compound that intelligence had marked as the location of a high-value asset requesting emergency extraction. Vance observed the departure from the warehouse loading dock, her clipboard held loosely as she appeared to conduct a routine inventory of supply crates. The helicopter's running lights traced a path across the sky that she had already memorized from the operational planning she was never supposed to access. Flight time to insertion point was 47 minutes. The extraction window opened at 22:30 and closed at 0100. Secondary extraction coordinates placed the alternate landing zone 12 kilometers south of the primary target. She calculated overwatch positions along the route, identifying 3 potential locations where a shooter with sufficient range could provide support if the operation encountered resistance. The ridgeline she had surveyed during her first week offered the best combination of elevation and concealment. If something went wrong tonight, she would need to reach that position before conventional response assets could arrive. The helicopter disappeared over the horizon, and Vance returned to her manifest reconciliation, her expression revealing nothing of the tactical analysis running beneath the surface. 90 minutes after insertion, Davis and his team reached the target compound through an approach route that had been selected for maximum concealment. The walls were low, the guards non-existent, and the silence that greeted them carried a wrongness that made the hair rise on the back of his neck. He signaled his team to hold position and advanced with his point man toward the main structure. The door stood open. The interior was empty. Signs of recent occupation littered the space: food containers and communication equipment, and personal items abandoned in obvious haste. The asset had been here, but someone had moved him within the past few hours. Davis keyed his radio with a report that no commander wanted to receive. Primary location is dry. He transmitted. Asset has been relocated. Evidence suggests departure within the past 2 to 3 hours. Requesting guidance on secondary options. The command center fell silent when the transmission came through. Holloway moved to the tactical display and studied the terrain surrounding the empty compound, searching for options that the intelligence failure had not anticipated. The asset could be anywhere within a 50-kilometer radius by now, hidden in any of 100 locations that his team could not search before dawn exposed their presence. He made the only decision available. Proceed to secondary extraction point, he ordered. We will reassess and plan a follow-up operation once you're back on base. QRF is being positioned in case you encounter resistance during movement. Davis acknowledged and began organizing his team for the 12-kilometer transit to the alternate landing zone. The route passed through terrain that offered multiple ambush points, and without the asset to protect, speed became their primary defense. They moved out in a tactical column, weapons ready, senses alert for the threat that empty compounds and abandoned equipment suggested was closer than anyone wanted to believe. Vance sat in her quarters monitoring the encrypted radio traffic on the receiver hidden beneath her mattress. The mission had shifted from extraction to egress, and the tone in the communications carried an edge that experienced operators developed when situations began deteriorating. The empty compound meant compromised intelligence. Compromised intelligence meant the enemy knew something that American forces did not. She rose and moved to the false panel concealed behind her storage locker. The rifle case waited in the darkness, assembled and ready for deployment. She had maintained it every week for 3 years, cleaning and calibrating equipment that officially did not exist for operations that would never be acknowledged. The radio traffic reported the team moving toward secondary extraction. 12 kilometers of hostile territory, 45 minutes of exposure, and a QRF that was still being positioned, which meant response time measured in tens of minutes rather than single digits. She lifted the case from its hiding place and began her final equipment check. Chief Warrant Officer Reyes worked late in the intelligence office, unable to release the anomaly that had caught his attention earlier in the day. Vance's access patterns did not match her personnel file, and the discrepancy nagged at him with the persistence of a problem that demanded resolution. His security console chimed with a new alert. Badge access logged at the motor pool, 2,247 hours. He pulled up the entry and found Vance's credentials attached to the ping. The motor pool was closed at this hour. Supply coordinators had no reason to access vehicles in the middle of the night. He switched to the security camera feeds and navigated to the motor pool coverage. The footage showed Vance moving through the facility with purpose, no hesitation, no uncertainty. She approached a Humvee and opened the rear compartment. Then she loaded a case into the vehicle, a long rectangular case that Reyes recognized immediately from its dimensions. He had seen cases like that in the armories of special operations units. They held precision rifle systems designed for engagements at distances that most soldiers could not comprehend. Supply coordinators did not carry such equipment. Supply coordinators did not move through motor pools at 2,247 hours with the deliberate efficiency of someone executing a practiced routine. Reyes watched her drive the Humvee toward the base exit and disappear from camera coverage. The gate logs would show her departure, and whatever explanation she offered would not account for the case, now hidden in the back of a military vehicle heading into the darkness. He saved the footage and added it to his growing file. The supply coordinator was not what she appeared to be, and tonight, for reasons he could not yet understand, she had decided to stop pretending. Vance identified the primary threat through her thermal scope, a machine gun position manned by 3 fighters whose overlapping fields of fire had pinned the SEAL team behind inadequate cover. The weapon was chewing through their protection with sustained bursts that would eventually find flesh if allowed to continue. Every second she waited was a second closer to American casualties. She settled her breathing into the rhythm that 12 years of training had carved in her nervous system. Heartbeat slowed, muscles relaxed. The crosshairs floated onto the first target with the patience of someone who understood that rushing a shot at 2,100 meters meant missing entirely. She squeezed the trigger, and the rifle spoke, the suppressor reducing the report to a sound that would not carry to the engagement zone. Through the scope, she watched the first hostile collapse over his weapon. The second fighter turned toward his fallen companion, confusion visible in his body language even at this distance. Her second shot caught him before he could process what was happening. The third attempted to flee, abandoning the machine gun in favor of survival. Her third round ended his retreat before he covered 5 meters. The machine gun fell silent. Senior Chief Davis heard the sustained fire from the enemy position stop without explanation. He raised his rifle and scanned the hostile location through his night vision optics, expecting to see the fighters repositioning or reloading. Instead, he saw 3 bodies sprawled around the weapon, motionless, eliminated by shots that no member of his team had fired. He keyed his radio with a transmission that reflected his confusion. "Command, be advised we have hostile casualties at the machine gun position. Confirm no friendly engagement from our location. Request identification of supporting asset." The response came back within seconds. "Negative on supporting assets in your area. Confirm hostile casualties without SEAL engagement." Davis scanned the darkness beyond the enemy positions, searching for muzzle flashes or movement that would identify whoever was shooting. He found nothing. The shots had come from somewhere beyond his visual range, delivered with a precision that defied the conditions. "Confirmed," he transmitted. 3 hostiles down. Unknown friendly shooter. Continuing to observe. Admiral Holloway received the report in the command center and immediately checked his asset board. The display showed no friendly units operating in the sector around his SEAL team. No drone coverage. No aircraft providing overwatch. No sniper teams inserted for support. His men were supposed to be alone out there, and someone was killing hostiles on their behalf without authorization or identification. He demanded clarification from his operations staff, his voice carrying the sharp edge of a commander confronting something outside his control. "Who is shooting? What asset do we have in that area that is not on my board?" The operations officer shook his head. "Nothing, sir. We have no explanation for the hostile casualties." Vance shifted her scope to the second enemy position, where 4 fighters had begun repositioning in response to the sudden silence of their machine gun team. They moved with the urgent carelessness of men who did not understand they were being hunted, clustering together as they tried to establish a new firing position. She dropped them in sequence. The first fell mid-stride. The second spun and collapsed as a round caught him turning. The third attempted to take cover behind a low wall, and she adjusted her aim to account for his movement, the shot finding him before he reached safety. The fourth froze for a fatal second, paralyzed by the incomprehensible death of his companions, and her final round of the sequence ended his hesitation permanently. 7 hostiles eliminated in under 2 minutes. 10 remaining. Davis watched the second position go silent with the same inexplicable efficiency as the first. For more hostiles down without any visible engagement from friendly forces. Whoever was shooting operated at a level that redefined his understanding of what precision marksmanship could accomplish under combat conditions. He noticed the change in enemy behavior before consciously processing what it meant. The remaining hostile fire had become sporadic, uncertain, lacking the disciplined coordination that had characterized the initial ambush. The fighters no longer knew where to aim because they could not identify what was killing them. Their tactical advantage had evaporated in the face of a threat they could not see or comprehend. Davis seized the opportunity. "All elements prepare for movement," he ordered through his team radio. "We push on my signal while the enemy is disorganized. Whatever is happening, we use it. Holloway watched the hostile count on his tactical display drop from 17 to 10 without any corresponding friendly action. His operations officer suggested the possibility of a friendly asset operating under compartmented orders, something outside the normal command structure that Holloway had not been briefed on. The suggestion made tactical sense, but did nothing to ease his frustration. "Nothing operates in my area without my knowledge," he said. His jaw tightened as another hostile marker transitioned from red to gray. "Whoever this is, they are saving my men. But I want to know who they are and why they are here before this night is over." The command center continued its frantic search for answers while the engagement zone transformed from a desperate last stand into something that looked increasingly like a systematic elimination. Davis and his team remained pinned, but the pressure against them was evaporating one precise shot at a time. Vance maintained her rhythm, identifying targets and engaging them with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this work across 4 continents. Each shot required the same calculation of wind and distance and elevation. Each trigger squeeze demanded the same controlled breathing and steady hands. The fact that she was saving lives rather than simply eliminating threats did not change the technical requirements of the work. She had 10 targets remaining and all the time she needed to finish what she had started.